Hello and welcome. This is the second episode of the Bastani Factor. My name is Aaron Bastani. Before we start tonight's show, I just want to thank the Novara Media supporters who've made this show possible. We have Novara FM, our Friday podcast. We have Tysky Sour, hosted by Michael Walker every Monday. But we said ahead of that fundraiser that we wanted to run nightly shows. One of them was going to be the Bastani Factor. This show will be fortnightly. It will be every second Tuesday. Ideally, we want to make it weekly, and then after that, as frequently as possible. There will be other shows in the pipeline as well, one hosted by the one and only Ash Sarkar. But thank you again, and to make more shows like this possible, head to sport.novaramedia.com. The hashtag is TBF. Get on that hashtag on Twitter, share the show, share it to Facebook, hit the subscribe button, because this is going to be everything you want from a political analysis show and more. It's the Bill O'Reilly factor meets Trevor Noah meets Knowing Me, Knowing You with Alan Partridge. So I'm really happy we're getting started with this. The set is still not what it wants to be. I'm sure in 6 months' time, a year's time, we'll be looking back at this and going, wow, we've come so far. But regardless, a second live show for Novara Media on our YouTube channel is really phenomenal. Thank you again. We're talking a few interesting stories tonight. The first is Theresa May and that Observer front page. Now, I know what you're saying. Aaron, this happened on Sunday. If it's so unimportant, if the Observer is so irrelevant, which it broadly is, why are you so cut up about it? Well, maybe Gary can bring up that Observer front page. This is the, here we go. This is the Theresa May piece. That's the op-ed that she wrote. It also went on the front page of the Observer. And it really pissed me off. A few reasons why. She says that she wants Labour voters to look again at the Conservative Party. Now, you have to understand, there's a broader context here. Theresa May, this is, of course, the week following the weekend following Tory Party conference. Theresa May didn't give an interview to anybody in broadcast media except the BBC. She rejected Channel 4, Channel 5, ITV, Sky, everybody. She did BBC. Now, why on earth do you think she gave this piece to the Observer rather than the Daily Mail or the Sunday Express? She used them, right? And what really riles me more than anything else is that when she says, I want you to look again at the Tories, what does she mean? Does she mean look again at the falling wages or the rising use of food banks? Look again at the levels of home ownership, which are now falling to levels last seen in 1985? Look again at the fact that most of her colleagues in the Tory party, and I really do mean this, it's empirically verifiable, are either bigots, misanthropes, misogynists or racists. I mean, one of her own colleagues used the N-word, right? So look again at what? I'm kind of intrigued because there's really not much of a record to shout about if you're a Tory. And if you've been watching Novara Media for any amount of time, I've been saying that for a while. Now, sadly, I'm going to take you through this piece step by step. We're going to do what is called a content analysis in the academy. And as you'll know, I am a doctor, so I'm trained in doing this stuff. So let's start from the top. And maybe Gary can pull up the piece and we can scroll down. Theresa May, Prime Minister, starts with these words. I want the Conservatives to be a party for the whole country. I believe that the principles that guide us, security for families and the country, freedom under the rule of law and opportunity for everyone, can unite our people and help build a better future for our country. Wow. So we know immediately this hasn't been edited by the Observer because we see the word country twice in one sentence. We see it 3 times in the first paragraph. Pretty impressive that a Tory Prime Minister can use a regurgitated speech with no new news and it's not been edited and a allegedly progressive centre-left publication is willing to publish it. But there's more. That responsibility, she goes on to say, also rests on our shoulders because of what has happened to Labour over the past few years, by which she must mean, of course, the rise of Jeremy Corbyn. Millions of people who have supported Labour all of their lives are so appalled by what has happened to a once great party under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn. Can I just say, that's clearly not true. The insinuation there is that people have left the Labour Party because of Jeremy Corbyn. We know the complete opposite is the case. Labour has far more members. It's got about 4 times more members now than when Ed Miliband was leader. It has more voters voting for it in the last general election. Last general election had what? It had, was it 13 million? I mean, under Ed Miliband, it was 9.6 million. Their share of the vote was 40% last year. Under Ed Miliband, it was 30%. Under Gordon Brown before him, it was 29%. So that's not true. Anti-Semitism has grown. Yet the Labour Party has adopted the IHRA definition and the examples, and the Tories haven't. Okay. And by the way, we also know that the Tories are just really racist. The party's response to threats to our country's security has become equivocal. You guys can't even secure a fucking conference app. Okay? So please, maybe kind of conceal the security thing for a little while. And moderate Labour MPs have become targets for deselection and harassment. These are all alien to Labour's best traditions. Well, if Labour's best traditions are war in Iraq, are unaccountability, are MPs who feel they are better placed to serve the interests of big business and the establishment in this country rather than local members, the people that get them there in the first place, so be it. We've had an absolute break with the past. Fantastic. Long may it continue. She goes on to say, you can actually hear her voice where she says, just farcical, really. And this is where this angers me so much, because this is completely made up. This is the complete opposite of the truth. And yet, an allegedly progressive newspaper has published it, I would argue, that's the evidence, it seems to me, unedited. So we're investing in our NHS. They're not investing in our NHS. We know that the NHS is underfunded. Pretty much everybody says it, from the BMA, the British Medical Association, to NHS England. It's underfunded. And that's reflected, by the way, in ambulance arrival times falling, not meeting targets, any waiting times going up, waiting lists for non-urgent surgeries going up. If you type in YouTube, Novara Media, Aaron Bastani, NHS, the data's there. I've done videos and you can see the data as well. I can back all of this up. So that's just concocted, made up. We're driving up standards in our schools so every child can get a good start in life. Well, great. And you put up tuition fees to £9,000 a year. So even if they're super smart, super ambitious, at 18, they have the choice of either going into in-work poverty with an apprenticeship, earning like $2.70 an hour, or getting into £9,000 debt with really not much knowledge of what that will result in. Thank you so much. And 10 years on from the financial crisis, we are building an economy that works for everyone in our society. Wow! How the hell could The Observer, the sister paper of The Guardian, publish this? It gets worse. Over the past 8 years, this is apologism for the successful austerity. Nobody thinks this anymore, not even the Tories. Over the past 8 years, we've brought our economy back from the brink. Our public finances are in much better shape, and we've helped businesses create jobs. Yeah, they've created loads of jobs, outsourced, 0 hours contracts, freelance. Okay? The number of people who are in work and poor, households which are poor, which is 60% or less of the average wage, you're more likely to be in that category, in poverty, relative poverty, if somebody in the household works than doesn't work. That's really new. That never happened until the Conservatives were in power, first in coalition with the Lib Dems and then by themselves after 2015. And now with the DUP, of course. That's really new. So yes, the Tories have had a jobs miracle, but it's been a jobs miracle premised on low productivity, low wages, misery. That's really not something to shout about. She goes on to say, now I'm really sorry about this, but this article just angered me so much, I thought I'd break the whole thing down. In the past, economic change has left some communities behind. This time it will be different. Government is today stepping up to its proper strategic role in our economy, ensuring that good jobs and real opportunity are spread across the whole country, with every town and city seeing the benefit. Now, this is clearly a response to that great party political broadcast by the Labour Party, making overtures to towns. Towns are going to be the battleground of who wins the next general election, right? Labour have the cities, the Tories, this is the kind of easy binary. The Tories have the country, towns are going to be where it's won and lost. And this has obviously got the Tories frightened, so they're making shit up. The upsetting thing is that the Observer's enabling it. So these are our Conservative solutions that will build a country that works for everyone. Fixing markets, not destroying them. Helping with the cost of living. Ending austerity. Lie. Not true. Why is the Observer publishing this? Building an economy of the future which benefits the whole country. This is how we'll win the confidence of a new generation of voters. The British people are not bound by ideology, and there has never been a time when party labels have counted for less. This presents an opportunity Conservatives must seize, to be a party not for the few, and this is really good. This is really fucking good. Not for the few, not even for the many, but for everyone in our country who works hard and plays by the rules. Everyone that does X and Y. That's the many, you fucking idiot. That's the many. By definition of being the many, that's the many. This is just rhetorical garbage. We won't be for the few, we won't be for the many, we'll be for everyone except this minority. That's the fucking many. No? I mean, what's going on here? And the amazing thing is, some moron speechwriter concocted this trivial garbage, and not only does she have the temerity to try and pass this off the British public in a speech, a progressive news outlet prints it. Wow. Wow. Anyway. The response. Now, the reception of this in two ways was actually as important as the piece wasn't important. And people are saying, well, if it's so unimportant, why do you care? The reception is what matters. Okay? The reception is what matters. And reception is often very important. So, let's go to this. There was a tweet by Matt Zarb. Brave Matt Zarb. Will I get this up? Yeah, it's up here. He was slagging off the piece. He was saying, well, why has the Observer got it up? Quite right. And then this was very kindly shared by, let me get this up here. Nick Cohen was kind enough to reply. And he said, because I didn't know this. She's the Prime Minister, you wombat thick pillock. Of course, we know that she's the fucking Prime Minister, but here's a question for Nick Cohen. He's saying, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Nick Cohen can, correct this. He's saying that the Observer should print anything that the Prime Minister says. So if Theresa May pitches to the Observer and she says, I want to write an article about shitting in the bed, should the Observer print that, Nick? Or what if she says, oh, actually, food banks are good? Or actually, more people are earning more money than they were 10 years ago. Not true. So where's the line here, Nick? Where's the line? I agree. The Observer should be able to publish the Prime Minister. But ideally, given there was conference, you should have an interview. And in the absence of an interview, you certainly shouldn't be printing verbatim, clearly without any editorial oversight, a regurgitated speech. Because this wasn't just an op-ed piece, it also went onto the front page. That was why people were justifiably angry. This is not a story. Why is a left-wing, it's not fucking left-wing. Why is a liberal newspaper printing a press release designed and written by CCHQ to win over Labour voters? And it won't, by the way. Fuck me. Dan Carden was on Tiski Sauer last night. You can see that on the Navarra Media YouTube channel, saying normal people don't give a fuck what she dances like. Normal people, she's saying, I want them to look again at what we're offering. They're not offering anything. I actually want people to read this because they'll go, what's she actually talking about? What's she offering? The Tories aren't offering anything. And this is the interesting thing. They're saying, we're going to defend capitalism. You've kind of screwed up here because the whole point of capitalism is it's an ideology. It's a bunch of other things as well, but how it reproduces itself politically is as an ideology, right? So it tries to pass off social relations as natural relations, as inevitable, as necessary. Now, the second you start saying capitalism is something which has to be defended as capitalism, rather than this is just the world, there is no alternative, you have big problems. You have big problems. Anyway, it wasn't just Nick Cohen who was kind enough to take brave Matt Zarb to task. We also had, maybe we can get this tweet up as well, David Aronovich, or as I like to call him, Arsehatovich, because the guy frequently makes an arse hat of himself. Now, I know people are going, Aaron, I shouldn't call him a name. You're right. But this is just so rude. We can get this tweet up. David Aronovich. So rude. Very upsetting, actually. We got this up? By the way, formerly a member of the Communist Party. Fine. CPGB. Fine. Good. This guy is really, there's a lot of displacement that's going on here, right? Just saying. And I'm not a psychotherapist. She's the Prime Minister, caps lock. You utter buffoon. If your Messiah ever becomes PM, he'll get the same treatment. I very much doubt the Observer will ever print verbatim, word for word, something written by Jeremy Corbyn. And actually, even as somebody who's on the left, I wouldn't want that That's really bad. By the way, that'll be the same bit of the print media that brought you the Cambridge Analytica story. This is important because, yes, the Observer did the Cambridge Analytica story. Yes, the Guardian did great stuff on Grenfell, great stuff on Windrush. That was the reporting. That was the reporting, David. People like you and Nick Cohen, who do the comment, do the opinion, who've been wrong about everything for basically, well, a very long time, but in particular the last 3 years, that's where it's really falling short. People aren't turning away from the Observer and the Guardian, and I'm not just making that up. You can look at their ABC circulation. Go to the Press Gazette, Google ABC's newspaper last month. You can find them. People aren't leaving these newspapers because the reporting is bad, and there's a bunch of reasons why reporting's harder than ever because of money, because of digital. People are incensed at the political line coming out of them, particularly in comment, because it's trash. It is absolute trash. Absolute trash. Going back to Nick Cohen. Nick Cohen was kind enough. Maybe we can get this tweet up. Maybe I didn't actually put this tweet in there, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Nick Cohen, he wrote a tweet with Red Raw. I actually just retweeted this. And he's citing a piece by Red Raw, and they say something completely made up about how, well, we all know that Jeremy Corbyn is working with... This is the piece. Great work, Gary. Go to support.novaramedia.com. Help Gary. He's a great guy. Just got that out of nowhere. He's saying that this was just made up. I'm saying it's just made up. That Jeremy Corbyn and his office, we all know they work very closely with Carrie Ann Mendoza at the Canary and Squawk Box. Novara Media has had 2 interviews with Jeremy Corbyn since 2015. The first was in the first leadership campaign. You can check that on YouTube, right? Did very well. The second was in the second leadership campaign. Do you think I have a line to Jeremy Corbyn's office? Really? Maybe I can text somebody and say, oh, this looks really good, this looks really bad. They ignore me because in terms of their priorities, I'm down here. The idea that there's some Machiavellian plot between the Squawk Box and Novara Media and the leader's office. What the fuck are you talking about? What's more, there's no evidence for it. And Nick Cohen, this man who's so devoted to the truth, gleefully shares an article without a shred of evidence. Now, he did the same thing before with Red Raw. Red Raw, very intriguing little publication. And they've had to delete 2 articles recently and publish corrections because they weren't true, they were made up. He tweeted an article by them which was making claims about Jacobin magazine and Bhaskar Sankara, a great friend of the organisation, great guy. And it was made up. And he then deleted it. So, you have to ask a question here. Why is Nick Cohen repeatedly attacking Bhaskar Sankara, Novara Media? He's compared me to Tommy Robinson. Please. I'm much better looking. Matt Zarb. This is ridiculous. And he's citing a publication, Red Raw, which is repeatedly found to be lying. I mean, the great one for me was, apparently I was going to start a Downing Street press unit. The fake news smear unit. I mean, can you imagine? I don't know. I'm asking you because this is complete horseshit. It's completely made up. This is to Red Raw. Do we walk in and it says fake news? Just going to work. See you later. Go and do some fake news. Really? Are you so fucking pig shit thick that you think the guy at Squawk Box, somebody at Novara Media, and somebody from the Canary are going to do communications for 10 Downing Street in the event of a Labour win? What have you taken? What have you taken? I know it's the magic mushroom season, but Jesus Christ, there's no need for you to shit yourself all over the internet. Crazy. Here we go. I've actually got the claim here. Those who took to Twitter to mock the outrage, they're mocking the alt-left, misunderstood the alt-left's motivations. For some time now, Corbyn and his team have followed a very deliberate... Listen! For some time now, Corbyn and his team have followed a very deliberate strategy of sowing distrust on the MSM. Where is your evidence? Jeremy Corbyn was maligned by the mainstream media non-stop for 2 years. He never had a strategy to do anything. He's just saying, these people are really treating me unfairly. By all means, find information elsewhere. This is tinfoil shit. While simultaneously promoting their own alternative news sources, the Canary Squawk Box, where the views of the far left's opponents will never be honestly presented. Well, to whoever runs the Red Raw, come on Novara Media, you little anonymous slimy slugs, and we can talk to you about politics. They'll never give an honest assessment. You're the ones who are running a fake news website with complete anonymity. Give me a fucking break. Come on Novara Media. I'd love it. I would love it. Let's talk about the facts. I'm an empiricist. I'm a social scientist. Every claim I make, and look, I get things wrong. We all get things wrong, but I try to base it in empiricism. I try. I mean, so let's talk about it. Let's talk about how the economy is not working. Let's talk about climate change. Let's talk about how the agenda that's being led on by Labour really offers the only solution to the great crises of our time: ageing, climate change, automation. Let's talk about this openly. But instead, you're lying so frequently that you have to literally print corrections week after week, and nobody even knows who you are. And to top it all off, these are the people who are being shared by Nick Cohen. So committed to the truth and high quality journalism. Thank you, Nick. Thank you for soiling yourself on a repeated daily basis online. Thank you. So, we got the nonsense out of the way. We've talked about Theresa May. And get involved in the comments. At the end of this, I'll answer some of your questions. We've talked about Theresa May. I want to talk about climate change. Because this actually matters. Theresa May is a giant cosmic joke. In 50 years' time, nobody will know who Red Raw or Nick Cohen were. Climate change does, however, matter. Maybe Gary can pull this up. This went out on Monday. Went out yesterday. IPCC report, who are saying that basically we have 12 years, we have a dozen years for global warming to be kept at 1.5 degrees C. And it could go to 2 degrees without significant social, political, economic transformation. Now, they're already pricing in 1.5 degrees warming. The reason for that is that there is a lag between higher concentrations of greenhouse gases, primarily CO2, but not just CO2, carbon dioxide. There is a lag between higher concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere, which we already have, and warming. So they're saying simply by virtue of the concentrations we already have, there'll be further warming. We just don't know how much. They're saying here a degree plus, a degree centigrade plus. But we can still stop 2 degrees C. Now, here's the thing. I actually think this is a very conservative study. I thought the IPCC was already pricing in 2 degrees warming. So, I mean, it's very sensationalist. People have been jumping on it. But I think most kind of really well-informed people on climate change are already saying it'll be a miracle if we keep to 2 degrees warming. So I don't quite really get why this is a huge... I mean, maybe the fact it's so huge betokens the fact that not that many people are that well-informed about it. And the big thing is, if we go to beyond 2 degrees, which seems very likely, I would argue probable, if we go beyond 2 degrees, if we go to 3 degrees, what we'll likely see is a sequence of feedbacks. So at 3 degrees, the Amazon rainforest becomes a desert, right? It actually disappears. And of course, the Amazon rainforest doesn't just produce lots of oxygen, it also consumes lots of CO2. It's a great, what they call a carbon sink. That would clearly have massive global effects. So if we go to 3 degrees, the Amazon rainforest disappears. That pushes us to 4 degrees. And at 4 degrees, we have permafrost in Siberia melts. This allows huge concentrations of methane to be emitted into the atmosphere. Methane's not good. It's another greenhouse gas. And this would push us to 5. At 5 degrees, the seas become warmer. They're obviously getting warmer right now, but they would get so warm that not only would they be too acidic for most life to exist, but actually huge concentrations of what's called methane hydrate would be released from the oceans. And that would probably push us to 6 degrees. And at 6 degrees, we don't really know what the world will look like. It will clearly look very different. But the reality is, most of the planet at 6 degrees will either be desert or underwater. And agriculture on a scale needed for human survival will only be possible around the poles, North and South Pole. And you think, well, okay, well, humans can still live, right? Well, no, because we think there'll be such a high level of methane in the atmosphere that basically anything with lungs won't be able to breathe. Now, this isn't happening next week. This isn't happening next year. It may not even happen for several millennia. But the reality is, if we don't choose to decarbonise our economies within a generation, that is highly, highly possible. It's highly possible. So the question is, what kind of political action is necessary to stop that from happening? Because we're not talking about vineyards being able to grow in Britain. We're not talking about being able to take a holiday in Cornwall and thinking you're in Magaluf. We are talking about the extermination of large swathes of life on this planet. That includes our own species. Because climate change isn't just an issue of warming, rising sea levels. It also means, for instance, things like the melting of glacier water. Glaciers in around India, China, and Central Asia, they give clean drinking water to several billion people. Without those glaciers, those people can't drink water, right? Pretty big deal. With climate change, you'll see a declining crop yields pretty much everywhere, from the United States to Africa to the Middle East, even Southern Europe. That's at the precise moment, particularly in Africa, where populations are exploding. Africa could have lower crop yields because of climate change between now and 2050, while its population doubles. That's clearly not politically manageable. So climate change is not just an ecological crisis, it's clearly also a political, geopolitical, social, economic crisis, which demands solutions, I would argue, on a civilizational scale. And this is kind of interesting because I just mentioned methane. What do you think the number one byproduct of fracking is? You guessed it, methane. Fracking, rather. It's almost like you creating something which puts methane into the atmosphere. Fracking is incredibly energy intensive. It's only really economic with presumptions that fuel itself is prohibitively expensive. Surely that's an argument to move to renewables. You may remember the US, for instance, was meant to have a fracking revolution a few years ago, and it kind of fell apart because global oil prices fell. So once things like solar, wind get to price parity with most hydrocarbons, it's going to happen in most parts of the world over the course of the next decade, those fracking oil wells will be worthless. The problem is, between now and then, and they won't be drilled, but between now and then, we're going to put so much shit in the atmosphere that they could be the difference between survival or not. And I mentioned fracking because the government is now allowing drilling to resume in Lancashire. I think we've got something up here from the Lancashire Business View. I didn't know that publication existed, but it's there. So fracking is back in Lancashire. Meanwhile, Claire Perry, the UK Energy Minister, no, I've never heard of her either. That's what happens when people continually get sacked for being shit at their jobs. You get nobodies at the top. Has said today, this is in The Guardian, that rules to halt fracking operations based on the triggering of minor earthquakes could be relaxed. Read that sentence again. The government announced today that rules designed to halt fracking operations if they trigger minor earthquakes could be relaxed. Wow, this is disaster fucking capitalism. Wowee. Well, you know, there are some minor negative externalities, like huge amounts of methane, which will create an unbreathable atmosphere. And yes, it may trigger earthquakes in Lancashire, not fucking California, but that's just a minor externality because we now have cheap fracked gas, petroleum. What the fuck are you talking about? At the same time, and I'll go into more detail about this in a second, solar, wind are getting cheaper every year. Hydrocarbons are getting more expensive each year, which is why we're doing this banana shit. It needs to stop. And 3 guys tried to do precisely this. Let's pull this up. This is from The Guardian. End of September. Now, these guys are absolute heroes. Simon Roscoe Blevins, Richard Roberts, and Richard Loiseau. They went down the end of September. They basically tried to block a fracking site in 2017. They've been convicted of causing a public nuisance. Wowee. Fuck me. In more than a year. And by the way, a Crown Court costs around 15 grand a day to run. Causing a public nuisance. Wow. And you're looking at about 50 grand a year to send somebody to prison. What is this for? It is the state enforcing fossil fuel capitalism through absolute violence and idiocy. These people should be given medals, not sent to prison. And the people that are doing the drilling should be not even go to prison. I mean, they should be put into like cryogenic stasis or something. We haven't got the technology yet. You know, like in Demolition Man. This is ridiculous. Unbelievable. And if there's one idea you can take away from the conversation that's been catalysed about this IPCC report, it's that the age we live in, some people are calling it the Anthropocene, all right? There are distinct geological ages. You've probably heard of the Ice Age, the Holocene, etc., etc. And the claim is we now live in the Anthropocene, where we have the primary determinant of climate change, the climate's always been changing, is anthropogenic. It's man-made, it's human-made. And you can date this probably somewhere between the 1400s and the 1800s as it starts then. What happens then? Oh yes, that's it. The emergence of a new mode of production called capitalism, right? Production based on exchange value, based on profit. This then aligns in the early 1800s with the steam engine. The rest is history. Between the 1860s and today, we know that the world's temperatures have increased by about 0.8 degrees. So when people say, well, actually, the world isn't getting warmer, it's getting warmer, that's the exact number to say to them. Since the 1860s, the world has got 0.8 degrees warmer. Okay? Just has. And there is a counter-argument, which is actually the first episode of man-made climate change was actually very different. So, and this is amazing. This is in a great book by Jason Moore, The History of the World and Seven Cheap Things. And another book he wrote as well, I can't remember which it was. But the proposition, and this is borne out with good, strong data, is that the Europeans, the Spanish, killed so many people in South and Central America. They killed so many people that they exterminated a civilization. And the extermination of this civilization obviously meant the return of large swathes of rainforest. You know, if you read about Mayan civilization, their pyramids, these amazing architectural pyramids, are covered in forests. So because all these people were killed, all their cattle was obviously, wasn't being reproduced by human civilization, and you have the return of forest, this had a massive impact on the global climate, on global climate systems. Amazing to think. Now, that's tiny, obviously, compared to what we've been doing since the emergence of the steam engine, since the diffusion of capitalism across the globe. And we need to start calling this geological period what it is. It's not anthropogenic, it's not man-made, it's capitalism-made. We're living in the Capitalocene, okay? Because humans have been around for hundreds of thousands of years. And this is really recent. And it entirely maps onto the emergence of capitalism. And we can talk about why that is. I'm happy to do that maybe in the questions. But, and this is something that's just completely absent again. The IPCC report this document that went out on Monday, not one single mention of capitalism. Not one single mention. We can maybe pull this up. I saw this on the BBC website today. Stacey Dooley asks, are your clothes destroying the planet? Maybe we can get this up here. Yeah. No, they're not. Humans have been around for hundreds of thousands of years. They've worn clothes. Antecedent species like Homo erectus, they wore clothes. They weren't causing climate change. It's not human beings wearing clothes. It's the social relations which make those clothes. And people are saying, well, it's overpopulation. Why do you think it took until around 1800 for 1 billion humans to be born? And today we're looking at, I think, about, 8 billion? So it took all of that. It took hundreds of thousands of years for Homo sapiens to hit 1 billion. And then it basically goes, whoosh. I mean, it's kind of peaking out now. Maybe we'll peak at 10 billion by the end of the 21st century. Why do you think that happened? It was because of a new mode of production. Capitalism is really good at some things, right? Sustaining a very large human population, increasingly urbanized, is very good at it. The problem is you're doing that on borrowed time. So the issue here isn't overpopulation, it's capitalism. You have to understand the social relations which create all of these things. And we shouldn't stigmatize people for wearing cheap clothes. Somebody said to me, well, you didn't read the article. It's about, the microfibers, and this is worse for the environment than plastic. Why are the clothes made with microfibers? This is what I find amazing, right? You have to read Marx, read Capital chapters 1 and 2. It offers you a metaphysical basis for understanding the whole world. Why the fuck was this shirt made in this colour, in this material? How was this made? Why was this made? The razor I made, how was that made? It was all made because of something called exchange value. These are commodities. Why were they created? Because they're producing a profit for somebody somewhere. Now, if you're saying that, oh, well, this is bad, it has these negative consequences, well, the problem is with capitalists, they are the bad guys, but they're not the bad guys here because they're competing with one another. So if microfibers allow a higher rate of return for one capitalist and another capitalist doesn't use microfibers, They go out of business. And the worst thing of all under capitalism happens to them because they then become working class. They then have to sell their labour on a market to live. So it's not about fucking microfibres. It's not about individual choices. It's about capitalism. And capitalism is an economic and a social system which reproduces itself through several outsides. Okay? So it's really useful to think of capitalism as something, it's called value in motion. It's always creating value. It's getting labour, it's getting materials, and it's getting consumers and producers, and it's constant value in motion, creating a profit. That's the whole point, right? But it has some outsides. It has some assumptions of things being free. One is gender reproduction, right? We don't think that people should be paid to raise children. We don't think that people should be paid to look after aging parents. We don't think people, we have carers. And yes, sometimes they're remunerated because we have, social democratic welfare systems. But broadly speaking, under a capitalist logic, this isn't remunerated work, right? But the truth is, you can't have a labourer to create value for the capitalist unless you have somebody reproducing that labour power. So originally that would have been a mother, far less often a father, almost always a mother, grandparents, a wife, and so on. So that gendered reproduction makes possible formal value in motion. But it's not just gendered reproduction. It's also colonialism. Colonialism allows for this giant amount of free stuff to help this value in motion. So when we think about the genesis of capitalism, we think about Spanish conquistadors stealing gold, stealing materials, taking cocoa, taking tobacco, planting in other parts of the world, right? And then finally, the last big free thing is what are called by Marx the gifts of nature. Because capitalism looks at the gifts of nature as basically free stuff. A factor of production which can just be deployed to make profit for nothing, and there are no negative consequences. And so if we talk about the deforestation of Madeira is a really interesting example. It's an island, Portuguese island. In the 1400s, it was used to make lots of sugar. And this involved the deforestation of Madeira. And it was kind of, it was a blueprint for how we change the world when we're making things for profit. And the world is finite, okay? The world is not built to sustain an economic system which presumes infinite inputs for an infinite amount of time. And that's what capitalism is. And so the idea that the gifts of nature are just a free thing you can take and take and take and take, well, firstly, nature stops giving at a certain point. And secondly, that creates consequences like global warming, like loss of clean drinking water, like all manner of things, more extreme weather events happening. All these things are resulting from climate change. So it's capitalism you need to worry about, right? It's not fucking plastic bags or shopping at Primark. And the reality is workers need to reproduce their labour power if they're paid shit for as cheaply as possible. So they're going to buy cheap throwaway fucking clothes. They're not going to buy Giorgio Armani handmade. This will last 20 fucking years. Okay? So you need to have a sort of a Marxist understanding of capitalism to understand why this is all going on. And frankly, I find it remarkable that important, allegedly intelligent people don't look at history and the historical process as a materialist process, as something which is arising from material factors. It's crazy. They just think that history is like a series of accidents, and there's no sort of way of telescoping out and understanding things within the broader picture. Amazing. Well, you can. It's called Karl Marx. We're going to finish by looking at this video with Ash Sarkar. She puts it unbelievably well. So, Gary, you give me a shout when Ash comes up. Is she ready to go? Yeah, we're going to go to Ash. This is on Politics Live on the BBC yesterday. Great stuff.
Sometimes we overemphasize personal responsibility, like single-use plastic, straws, so on and so forth, whereas actually, in order to stem global temperature change at 1.5, you need to start thinking about banning private cars from cities. You need to start thinking about fully transitioning to renewables within 10 years. It's not going to be solved by having, a nice jute tote bag and having more tofu.
That's it. She just absolutely nailed it. It's not, if people try and make these sort of sentimental, personal critiques of your behaviour, bullshit. She called it out. Great stuff. I'm going to go to some questions, see what you're saying. Let's see what you guys are saying. Throw some questions at me. Hydro is old. Thank God that Kate and Wills have had kids, that capitalism has guaranteed more workforce. Well, the thing is, they're not proletarians. And actually, where do you think the word proletarian comes from? It comes from the Roman Republic. Proletarians were people who were so poor, they didn't pay taxes to Rome. Instead, they had offspring. They created children. And the word proletarian is from the fact that, you're producing labour power. That's literally where the word comes from. So no, Kate and Wills have kids that capitalism has guaranteed a workforce, Buddha UK. No, because they're not proletarians. Actually, their oldest son will actually be the next king of England, unless we have a republic, which I hope we will. Please ask Aaron to show us his biceps. They're long gone. If you go on Twitter, you can see me trolling somebody. There's a picture there, but they're long gone. Lee Harrington, brilliant. Marxism 101. Thanks. Well, thank you. Right, let's go to these questions. Labour theory of value, yay or nay? How much does Aaron bench? You're not going to fucking believe me if I tell you, right? You just think I'm a Billy bullshitter. I used to bench with a block of wood on my chest because I didn't want to hyperextend. 155? 1 rep max? But I was also I wasn't fat. I mean, I could be like 100 kg and do that, right? I wasn't like 15 stone. I was like 90 kilos, 88 kilos. So that's pretty good. I mean, it's not twice my body weight, but I was trying to do twice my body weight and never could, which is very rare. Can you tell me if it's better to superset chest? This is fucking ridiculous. I actually know quite a lot about this shit, to be fair. Can you tell me if it's better to superset chest and shoulders or do some lunges and squats? You can superset chest and shoulders. I mean, if you're going to superset stuff, generally do it for one body part. But the thing with shoulders and chest is they're both pushing motions. So if you haven't got much time, you can only work out 2 days a week. You want to superset the pushing stuff, chest, shoulders, or the pulling stuff, arms and back, right? So yes, there's your answer. Which argument would you put to those who claim that dealing with overpopulation is the best way to reduce climate change? Well, the thing is, we know that there are a few inevitabilities about how this stuff works. The one is higher levels of GDP, higher levels of gender equality, higher levels of education means that birth rates fall. That's happened in pretty much every country as they develop, right? So the presumption has to be this is a universal thing, just as urbanization was universal, right? It's a kind of feature of the development of capitalism, the forces of production. So I think it's very likely that we'll hit sort of peak human population in the next 100 years. And we may face a situation in, say, 200-300 years' time, unless we can reverse aging, which is perfectly plausible, but we probably shouldn't just assume it, that we'll have fewer people, even maybe less than we do now, with far more resources, right? So it's plausible that in several hundred years' time, we have a planet of 4 or 5 billion rather than 11 billion, which could be the max. So the idea of overpopulation, I think, is quite limited. I think, first of all, it can lead to quite classist and racist political conclusions, but also the reality is that we're going to peak anyway this century, and we probably have to bake that in. Clearly, you want birth rates to fall, you want people to live longer, so that's the kind of trajectory we see with North America and with Europe over the last century. We need to basically build a world that can feed, house, educate, and allow the flourishing of around 11 billion, 10 billion. The problem is we're already living, even just with the 8 billion we already have, we're living beyond the Earth's biocapacity. So that basically means the Earth, we're living, I think at the moment we're basically using the resource of about 1.6 Earths. But it's perfectly possible for 11 billion to live within the confines of one Earth. So on a very elementary basis, if the average human being had a diet that's associated with the average South Asian, high vegetation, little dairy, no meat, we could feed 10, 11 billion people. If we universalize the diet of the average North American, we could feed lots of meat. We could feed around 2.5 billion. Meat in itself is very energy inefficient. I mean, think about it. If you look at food as a conversion of energy, so obviously all plants, vegetables, fruits, grass, these are all very complicated they're chemical reactions which are powered by the sun. They're solar-powered chemical reactions. That energy, which is coming from the sun, is then consumed by herbivores, right? Herbivores are then eaten by carnivores, but there are lots of byproducts in that process. So, for instance, if you eat a cow, beef, you're not eating, obviously, the energy transmitted first from the sun and then to the plants. There are loads of byproducts, like what? The fact they were conscious, them breathing, their bones, teeth, hair. We don't eat any of that shit. So meat is generally very inefficient. So if we all went vegan, we could feed a world of 10, 11 billion people. Now, I'm not proposing that. I actually think because of advances in synthetic meat, we probably won't have to do that. But that's just one way of looking at it. So no, overpopulation is not right. We could have a world of 5 billion. If they all had the average diet of a North American, we'd still be fucked. So it's about social relations, it's about patterns, it's about how we build society rather than the actual numbers. But it's a really important question, thank you. Use of water and meat production is mad, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the allocation of, I think, fresh water, it's in the book, Fully Automated Luxury Communism. I think it's over 50% of freshwater use in agriculture is for meat. Land, you look at the destruction, I talked about the Amazon rainforest earlier on. Amazon is being torn down for cattle farming. Lots of byproducts, methane, I said that's a greenhouse gas. Huge amounts of methane are created by cows farting. So meat is very bad, whichever way you look at it. It's very labour intensive, it's very land intensive, it's very water intensive, and it has lots of negative side effects for the environment. So if you can reduce meat in your diet, I mean, I just said I would demur from personal solutions, but not eating loads of meat is a good thing. Probably from a point of view of health as well, it's probably quite good. I don't really buy the idea of in vitro meat, says Gary. Well, it's happening. Synthetic meat, it's happening. And it's happening in two ways. So there was this first fake burger made by a guy called Mark Post in 2008. This was a $300,000 burger. So this is basically you get meat cells and you scale them almost like you're brewing beer with a genetically modified variant of yeast. And you can do this with loads of stuff. You can do it with milk, you can do it with loads of stuff. Basically growing organic products like their alcohol, like wine or beer. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it, and you may have heard of the Impossible Burger, is that you get proteins that already exist in nature and you use these to replicate tastes and flavours and qualities that we see with meat products. So the Impossible Burger does this with something called heme. And there are millions of crops with millions of attributes that we don't really know and that we can exploit and we can mix. So it's perfectly possible, actually, that we can make a chicken breast that tastes and looks and feels identical, indistinguishable from a chicken breast. But we haven't yet mapped the qualities of this food. And I would say that that revolution in food is an information revolution, because for the first time, because of digitization, we can map the qualities of these foods and then we can reproduce them. I mean, gene sequencing and genomics is one example of this. But that's the model of Impossible Burger, Impossible Foods. So there's two kinds of synthetic meat going on here. Synthetic milk gapes. Is that a Mike Gapes joke or synthetic milk? Yeah, it's a thing. You can Google it. It's being done. And so the question is for socialists, what capitalism will try and do is it will try and patent these genetically modified yeasts that allow for the rapid scaling of milk and all these products. They'll patent it. And so the struggle has to be, comrades, to say no. This can't be subject to the forces of predatory capitalism, but must in fact be the dividend of all. Progress is a myth. Tell that to anyone with fucking clean water and a toilet and vaccines. Painkillers? You don't like fucking painkillers? They're quite new. Anesthetic is quite new. Would you like to be operated on with a needle and no painkillers? I don't think so. Progress definitely exists. It can be overstated, but it definitely exists. Question mark from Gary. Fancy going to try one? Okay, that's not a question. Is a giant bicep a synthetic food? Have you heard of something called, and this is from Andrew Burridge, have you heard of something called synthol? It's where they inject this shit into their arms. There you go. Well, I mean, no, is your answer. Let's see. Meat factory grown without nervous or immune systems, pluck evolution factories. Okay, so yeah, the argument for synthetic meat being far more energy efficient is that, and this is not the synthetic meat I was talking about with vegetables, but the Mark Post Petri dish test tube meat. The argument that they would make is this is the exact same meat, but it's so efficient because you don't have the bones, you don't have the stuff you can't eat, you don't have the offal, you don't have the byproducts, you don't have the consciousness, you don't have the digestive processes. All of that is effectively a loss of energy, which instead can be just directly converted from solar and a few inputs, once we have renewable energies, directly into synthetic meat. Sounds crazy, I know, but it's already happening. And actually, if you look at the declining cost of meat, synthetic meat, there's a company that recently created a synthetic meatball for less than $1,000. That's obviously a lot of money, but when you consider that the burger made 10 years ago by Mark Post was $325,000, that's big. And so if these products continue to fall in price, it may be that they're not just cleaner, more environmentally friendly than meat, they may also be cheaper. At which point, again, we go back to competition capitalism. Capitalists will have to compete, because if I can get a synthetic burger and it's cheaper than the burger from Asda made from animals, there's a market incentive to sell the other one, because they'll be priced out of business. Now, I'm not saying we should trust that. I'm saying we should probably accelerate it. What else we got here? We don't need synthetic meats. We probably do. Maybe the book you just referenced. It's my book. Fully Automated Luxury Communism. It's coming out next June. We got some great questions here. Navarra Party in Brighton, please. I love Brighton. Any thoughts on fair trade certification? You know, look, it's better. Look, not shit. I'm not going to be some sort of misanthrope that says shop at Poundland. Although people, that's the point, right? If you can afford that shit, if you can afford fair trade stuff, environmentally friendly stuff, of course you should use it. But if somebody's on the breadline, they should have absolutely zero guilt about shopping at Poundland or TK Maxx or Lidl or anywhere else, right? So that's why we have to transform the social system rather than make working class people feel guilty. How old are you? A lady never tells. You should tour America with your book. They will love you. That's good. Yeah, well, I hope so. Touch wood. It's being sold in America. It's going to have an American edition. Are we going to have a TBF next Tuesday? It's every other Tuesday. If you want to make it every Tuesday, go to support.novaramedia.com. Help us build a new media for different politics. I want to do this show. If I could do this show, look, if Gary didn't get sick of me because he sees me too much, he sees me like a couple of times a week, I would do it every day. I would say, Gary, the Novara Media supporters have allowed us to rent a flat together. Let's just broadcast from there. But, you know, he'd go crazy. But I would like to do this as much as possible. So, but for now, it's just every fortnight. There would be side effects of synthetic meats, especially if done cheaply. Well, tell me. I mean, there wouldn't be the methane produced from synthetic beef because we're not having cows fucking fart and shit everywhere. Tell me the side effects. I mean, there's side effects of not having synthetic meat, which is huge amounts of land loss, huge amounts of clean water being used for agriculture, huge amounts of human labour. I mean, come on. Give me a break. I'd love to see you on Bill Maher in the US. Yeah, that'd be good. That would be good. The guy chats so much shit. Aaron, go on, Chapo. Why doesn't eco-terrorism happen? Lovely question. Well, because terrorism tends not really to be very successful. It's only really been successful in national liberation struggles. There's not really many examples of it being, particularly successful. You can look at anarchism at the beginning of the 20th century. Didn't really do very much, did it? Europe in the 70s didn't really work. So, I mean, people don't use it or do it because it doesn't really work. So, don't do terrorism, kids. New diseases from synthetic meats, CJD. CJD was a result of animals being fed shit. I mean, the complete opposite, in fact. If you look at the supply chains of the modern meat industry, it's repulsive. There's loads of shit we never find out about. So, I would disagree, actually. CJD is, yes, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, mad cow disease. Aaron, please go on Chapo and arm wrestle Felix. What are the main differences in terms of exploitation between English workers and other workers in Britain and Ireland? Read 7 Cheap Things and touched on it lightly in terms of wages. Okay, this is a really good question. Workers in England, as it industrialised, were exploited. Okay? Their lives were terrible. There is an MP in the House of Commons in the 1830s, I think. You have the swing riots in Dorset, you have Luddism in the Midlands, you have the Highland clearances, terrible things are happening. The Acts of Enclosure, terrible things are happening. And what the Acts of Enclosure in the 1830s were basically the culmination of a centuries-long process of taking a means of social reproduction which was commonly owned into private hands, and to basically, it's sort of like, it was the rocket boosters for modern capitalism, was the Enclosure Acts, because the Enclosure Acts did a few things. Firstly, it created landless labourers, people who no longer could live off the land. They had to then sell their labour on a market as wage labourers. Feature of capitalism is you need wage labourers. It did that. It also allowed for the land to be used more profitably. So previously you had a commons, humans were living there very happily. They were replaced by, guess what? Most enclosed land, what do you think it was used for? Sheep, because the wool could be sold, the meat could be, sold to people that want to eat it, right? So sheep were given land instead of human beings because it made profit people. I mean, that sounds fucked up, but that's literally how capitalism works. If having a sheep on an acre of land makes more money than a human being, then if you're a capitalist, you'll do the former. It's a fucked up system, but that's how it works. Anyway, the experience of British working class people, labourers, was appalling in this period. However, it was mitigated by the fact that their labour power had to be reproduced domestically by cheap imports of foods. So you have relatively cheap tea, you have relatively cheap wheat. At the same time, we're nabbing all this stuff and we're selling our stuff to India. Free trade. Everybody talks about post-Brexit Britain, free trade deals. If an Indian business wanted to sell something to the UK in the mid-19th century, I think the tariff was 60%, which is clearly not a trade deal we'll get today. So they were more fucked than we were. And actually the fucking of India and China allowed the subjection of the British working class in a far more orderly way, because it allowed them to reproduce their labour power without uprisings, without deaths, without fatalities, far more easily. Ireland, of course, is different. Irish potato famine, how the Irish are treated, basically after the mid-1650s all the way through to the 20th century is appalling, and Ireland most certainly should be viewed as a colonised country, as a country which was subjected to the absolute worst horrors of the British Empire. I'm going to take one more question, then we're going to go. It is fucked up. This is about synthetic meat again, right? Okay, good. It is fucked up from natural history perspective, like factory-grown animal flesh. It's fucked up from a natural... Look, everything is fucked up from a natural history perspective. And the reality is, all food is... Well, most food is man-made. Modern wheat is created from 3 different varieties of wild grass. Most pulses... Bananas, we start breeding. We don't actually breed bananas. They can't breed. They're all sterile. If you notice, a banana has no seeds in it. These are entirely man-made crops, right? We re-engineer the informational content of foods. We have done for 10,000 years since the agricultural revolution. We didn't know how we were doing it until we understood heredity in the 1900s, but we were still doing it without knowing what it was. Tacit knowledge, right? Knowledge born of experience rather than education. So it's not fucked up. I mean, all food production's fucked up. Where do you draw the line? We're pre-special animals. The point is, would it allow 11 billion humans to live within the biocapacity of the planet? Probably. Final question. Wolves to bag a European spot? No. Bournemouth. Great. Well, that was the second episode of the Bastani Factor, TBF. Hit the subscribe button. I'm going to make this very, very, very regular. Much slicker, much better. Trevor Noah meets Alan Partridge and Glenn Beck. We'll have a better set. Everything, but for now, it's over and out, and I'll see you again in a fortnight. You've been great. Good night.